Oh, and there's that light on right now. Hi, everybody. Welcome to ISES Hangouts. Man, I am so excited for today's show. This is going to be awesome. Welcome to ISES Hangouts. ISES is the International Special Events Society. We have chapters worldwide. If you have interest in being in the event industry or are in the event industry, we are a good bunch of people to know. You can find us at ISES.com or go chase us down on Google. It's ISES. So this week, we're going to start chipping away at this mountainous topic of productivity. And I wanted to start with something a little less abstract than usual and keep it near and dear to the hearts of the event planners around the world. And it was actually, I can't remember whether it was Brian Atkinson or Erica Pruitt, but they were like, we should do a thing on checklists. And unfortunately, neither of them are here to join us today, but that's totally fine because we have all these other lovely people who are going to share their experience. So the checklist it's something of an unsung hero. We use them and we abuse them and we throw them out, and we certainly don't invite them to wrap parties. They cover every part of our work, from like who am I buying lunch for what needs to go on this truck, to what should have come back on this truck, and how do we know that sites are safe for visitors. It's this large sweeping overall thing that can encompass how do I know when this project is done. And so when we in fact actually use them for ISES Hangouts, as Shayla will attest to. There's actually, this show is just an execution of 6 checklists. So, well, okay, not just that. It's also the mountain of effort that goes in behind all of the people who help contribute to this, including those who help us find guests, the guests who come on the show, all of the work that Shayla does on both the organizational and the technical end, and of course Emily McDonald out there doing all of the tweeting, the twittering, and all of that business. But it is just 6 checklists. So the checklist is majestic and unsung, and today we're going to try and talk about the checklist. So buckle up, viewers at home, for we are about to blow your minds with some incredible organizational wisdom and mind bombs of checklistery. And why? Why are they important? And what do they say about the event industry? What does it say? What do checklists say about the services that we deliver? I don't necessarily have the answers, but I'm hoping that my panel does. So we are joined by this just magnificent group of people today. We have John Neuenberg, whose name I'm pronouncing correctly, with W5 Coaching. He is a highly esteemed business coach. In fact, he's worked with both Corinne Kessel and Shelley Johnson from ISES Vancouver. So he's come to bring his organizational wisdom. We have Nil Socek, all the way from ISES Denver. She is with Splendor for Your Guests, and she is the VP of Membership with ISES Denver. And we also have another member from ISES Canada. We have Stephanie LeBlond with LeBlond Studio. She's the VP of Marketing with ISES Calgary. We have, of course, our stalwart and brave Corinne Kessel, always telling us exactly what she's thinking and exposing her possibly terrible corporate secrets to us, who is the president of ISES Vancouver, and of course, Shayla Gabriel. She is joining us from ISES Vancouver. She is with Chair Decor, and for any of you who've watched the show before, knows that she is basically the one who does all the work, where I just show up and be pretty. Oh, and speaking of which, I'm Jay Harmer. I'm one of the board members with ISES Vancouver, and I'm your host today. So, after all of that talking, hopefully shortly I will shut up and we'll get to listen to some wisdom. So here's the plan. I'm going to put our panel in the hot seat, and I'm going to ask them a bunch of questions and hopefully trigger a solid discussion about checklists. I'll try and extract as much smartness from their brains as quickly as I can in about 45 minutes, but we would love to hear from you. I'm not sure, is our Q&A plugin up and running, Shayla?
Yes, it is.
Perfect. So the Q&A plugin is up and running, which you can access off the Google Plus event page. In addition to that, you can comment on YouTube. You can Twitter using the hashtag ISES Hangouts. You can tweet directly to ISES Vancouver. And something else in there, you can email us at hangouts@isesvancouver.com. So with all that talking, let's get started. So does anybody know anything of the history of checklists? Does anybody know where they came from? Anyone?
I can tell you that.
Oh, John knows.
Do you know that in about 1935, Boeing Aircrafts was trying to get twin-engine aircrafts off the ground, and it wasn't going very well. In fact, they were about to abandon the project, thinking that mankind wasn't clever enough to be able to get a twin-engine aircraft off the ground because they continuously got it wrong or got the sequence wrong. until someone came up with the clever thing known as a checklist. That's right. So today, every aircraft, every pilot throughout the world goes through a pre-flight checklist as their way of making sure that they're going to do everything that's necessary and do it in the right order to get that aircraft off the ground. So if it's good enough for airplanes, it must be good enough for the rest of us.
Well, so that's funny because I was actually and it's actually incredibly important in any aerospace. There's all these great checklists that astronauts
NASA.
use. Yeah. So, and for those of you who are familiar with the other stuff I work on, I actually do a show about space and astronomy, and so I have a great love for space stuff. Right. So, is there anything particular about checklists which is? Oh man, I was going to say I wanted to start with are they good for us? Are we too good for checklists? But I think John has pretty much covered that. No, we are not. They're good enough for NASA.
Well,
So,
let me, at the risk of hogging too much airtime, let me respond to that very question, which is this: no matter how much discipline you have, it's not enough. No matter how much discipline you have, it's not enough. And so there's some alternatives or replacements for discipline, and one of them is structure. The degree that you can create structure, and checklist is a fantastic example of structure, we can then dispose of or not rely on discipline in order to get the thing done. And that's in fact what happened with Boeing. Discipline wasn't enough to, get that aircraft off the ground, but when they replaced it with structure, that was a suitable alternative, and in fact a much more effective alternative. So,
okay. Well, I think we've pretty much covered everything about checklists. We're now at the end of our show. That was perfect, John. That was great. Now I have to write a whole bunch of questions really fast. That's fantastic. So the idea that checklists are a replacement for discipline by being structure, and it's also, and this is my personal experience, is a replacement for willpower.
Exactly.
So that's the other sort of side of the coin with discipline, is when I don't want to do things, I will turn to checklists. All right, so I'm gonna plow ahead though. Thank you, John. That was fantastic. So why are checklists and this is specific? I want to direct this to the event industry. So this is directed at Stephanie, Neil, and Corrine and Shayla. Why are they so valuable for the event industry? Why are checklists so valuable for us? Really?
I think it gives us a point A, B, C. It kind of takes a little bit of the liability out of what we do.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have to make sure that we fulfill certain things
right
before the next step. So.
Right. Okay.
And it takes. Sorry if I may.
Yes, of course.
It takes. It takes some of the load off of you. So like, if you keep going through the checklist, and if you miss something, then it's all new. But if you did everything in the checklist, then it's not your fault.
Man, I feel like we're totally dancing around a really amazing, mind-blowing point. Corrine, get in there.
I have a question, actually.
No, that's my job.
Oh, well, it's just a comment then. I'll turn it into a comment. I think I struggle with actually getting the buy-in to the checklist. So, I'd be interested to, for my other event industry colleagues, how do you get buy-in from your team to actually use the checklist? Because I got a checklist for everything. I've got a form for that. I have all these things, but I struggle with, sometimes when you're dealing with creative minds or creative people, they don't want to be bound by the checklist. Mm-hmm. And how do you actually get people to actually follow the checklist? Because the checklist, when you follow the checklist, works. But if you don't follow the checklist, you'll probably miss something.
Wow. Okay, you know what? I want to put, and I promise we will get to that. I want to talk a little bit more about why we use them and what they're for, but then we will just spend the rest of the show talking about how we get people to use them. That is brilliant. What a great question. Okay.
I have comments about Koreans, but we'll wait for that.
Yeah, no, hang on. I just want to lay a little bit more of a foundation, and then we'll talk about how do we get them.
Well, I wanted to answer your first question, Jason, if I might.
Please do.
I think checklists are important in the event industry because we are deadline driven. Everything happens either before the event or at the event or after the event. So everything has to be, part of a timeline, and all the actions have to happen within that.
Mm.
And a lot of it's used for risk management, right? Like so, like what in if we're doing like if we're sitting down with an event, like a lot of it will use checklists mostly for us is in terms of risk and all the sort of possible, you know, is it indoors, is it outdoors, is it this, is there going to be wind, is there going to be that? So it makes us pick the right products or give the right, even when we're back in the quoting stage.
Yeah. So I'm gonna try and sum up what you guys just said. I think that the reason that they're valuable, based on what you've told me, is that we're really in the details business. And that by using a checklist, we don't have to remember the details in our brain, and that we get to put them down on a piece of paper. And that is, I think for me, I think that is the reason that these things are so great, because they make sure we hit those marks. And as Stephanie was pointing out, we are on a deadline. And so that we make sure that our brains don't have to hold on to all this information because it's got to be done by Tuesday, and that we use the checklist to make sure that we crank through all these details. And so the idea of trying to remember a whole bunch of details is bananas. Why not just let the checklist do it for you? So I think that's fantastic. So thank you guys. That was great.
I think it's also not just the details, but that the application of those details changes from venue to venue, from event to event, from principle to principle. And so that's the second part of the difficulty, is the setting is complex. It's variable.
Absolutely.
I think it also brings us to a level of consistency of delivery, so we can deliver the same level of service and product and
heck yeah,
regardless, because we just go step by step down the path.
So we've covered them then as important for client services. They are important for dealing with change. They're important for handling different types of venues. They're important for making sure we hit deadlines. Like this, is there anything they can't do? Shouldn't just everything be checklist all the time?
I think it's important with team communication too. It's a really big one for our company.
Absolutely. Documentation, communicating, and delegation. Great purposes, great uses for checklists. Anything else? Anything else we want to throw in this pile?
Going back on what Neil was saying, it's great for consistency. So keeping your event the same. But I know for myself, when I'm putting together these shows, I just use it as a guideline. I'm so used to like putting the show together that it's there just for safekeeping. Like if I ever like forget one of the steps, I can go back to it. But I've been doing it so long that I can do it like off the top of my head.
Well, I think it's great that because you're a checklist machine. Like you have so much experience with like running through the process of getting the show into the air. Like that is it's great that you're sharing that with us. That's so good. Right. So, man, should we just dive straight into Corinne's question? I feel like we should.
I think so.
Yeah, me too. So let's forget the rest of my script. So let's talk about this, guys. So when you've got creative types or just anybody, how do you get them on board with using checklists as part of their process? What do you do, Neil? How do you get people to use them?
Well, one of the things that I just thought of was as buy-in, but also because it's a way to get the team all on the same page, but also you can hand off to someone else if you're unavailable to do the project or do the task, whatever that is. It's all documented. And so one of the things that I kind of explain is that if we all follow the system and use the checklist, then we can just pass it off. If you're out because you're sick, or if you're going to move on to a different position or a different job, then it's easier to have succession and have someone else take over for you.
Absolutely, yeah, for sure. Definitely is part of the delegatory process and part of documentation. All right, I'm gonna direct this one over to John. I feel like John is gonna just knock this one out of the park. So John, how do we get people to buy into our checklists? How do we get people to use them? How do we convey the idea that they're important aside from getting them to watch this show?
Well, if I go back to what Corinne started with, if the person who is in charge of the organization makes them important, everyone else in the organization will make them important. If they're not important, if they don't get the attention that you'd like to give, if they don't get your attention, they won't get anyone else's attention. So it starts with how often do you make it part of your process to help others understand how important it is to them. If you're getting around to it once every month or two, and you're seeing that the checklist didn't happen or not up to your satisfaction, and that causes you to get excited or angry about things, then that's likely the level of effectiveness that you're going to get. So if you want checklists to be important, you make them important, and then everyone else will then deem that, oh, this is something I have to pay attention to.
Yeah, and I think what you're describing there is good leadership, where you're like
leadership, management, delegation, absolutely.
Yeah,
so
sure.
it starts with that. There's lots of people. Pilots, as an example, are very important. High ego people, surgeons in hospitals. These are all people that feel like, hey, I don't need a checklist. I'm good enough. I can get along without a checklist, and yet all of those people are willing to use checklists because they recognize the cost of failure is so high that I won't take that risk. What's the risk to a surgeon if they get something wrong, cut off the wrong leg, or operate on the wrong part, or what's the risk
connecting
to
an in valve to an out valve? Yeah, no, it's funny actually. When I was researching the show, I actually came across a study about checklists. There is one of the things we're gonna talk about later is other resources for checklists. And one of the studies they did was, how much better would you feel as a patient knowing your surgeon was using a checklist? And everybody was like, yeah, no, that'd be good. I think.
Well, in fact, that study that you're referring to also discovered that checklists was a way of equalizing communication and putting everyone on the same plateau when it came to ensuring that the quality of the work was important. Again, in airlines, particularly Korean airlines, who had a number of circumstances where they had accidents, in that culture, the captain was never to be questioned. In the culture of the surgical operating room, the surgeon is never to be questioned by anyone in that operating room. And so as a result, people were afraid to say, hey, that's the wrong arm, or hey, did you remember to do this or do that?
Isn't the thumb supposed to point inwards?
Pardon me?
Isn't the thumb supposed to point inwards?
Exactly. And so checklists was a way of giving everyone a voice, giving everyone a way to say, hey, did we do the tick on that thing?
Okay, so I'm going to try and so we talked about how one way of developing buy-in is that you make it clear to people that this is their documentation, that this is how they're being delegated to from mail, which I think is great. I'm going to just take on one of yours, which is the idea that as part of the leadership you demonstrate that this is the way that you do things and this is why it's important, and then it's not only do as I say but do as I do. And so I think that both of those are all great. Can we get some other? I want to crack this buy-in thing. I've got some ideas, but I want to hear from you guys first. What else can we do?
I got a couple ideas to throw in.
Heck yeah!
Well, my team is highly creative, not only the photographers but the designers in the office. And for the workflow, how we gather images in, how we select them, how we, the whole process of what happens to the images once they're in the camera, and on between that time and when they get to the client, it's all templated, it's all checklists. And there's a few of us working with that list. So what I've laid or what I've explained to the team, again, who are very creative beings, is if we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time, if we don't have to reinvent or rethink what's the next step again, then we can really focus our creative brain on where it really matters the most.
So it's more efficient to get that stuff out of the way.
Right. So I've, when there's a new person coming onto the team, I say, here's the list, work with it, and then I always tell them, if you have a better way to do it, let's talk about it, and we make adjustments.
Nice.
So it's livable, like it's a living document.
Yeah.
And we make it better in time. So the creative, minds can say, hey, I have a better way to do it, and they can have input on changing it, and then it changes the template for everyone.
I think that's great. The developing ownership with the checklist, like for the checklist of the show, like I help sketch them out in the beginning, but they have been all Shayla all the time. She owns them, she develops them, she builds them, she helps build improvements to them. So that, like, yeah, I totally think that making it a part of someone's work where they recognize that it's a tool that they have and that they have domain over. I think that is a really great point.
I think too, Corinne, you were saying how to have your team use them. I mean, my situation may be different. Sometimes I think that my team could feel, if I didn't have my finger on the pulse, there's a potential that they could feel invisible because, let's say, the editors, if I look at an image, I can't tell who did the retouch, which is a good thing because we want it to be consistent across the board. But I can go into, we use Basecamp for that, so I can go into Basecamp and I can see who checked off what step. Mm-hmm. And just last weekend, somebody hadn't checked off, like they went to work and they hadn't checked off, and I had a question about an edit, so I went back in Basecamp and nobody had assigned, like had claimed, if you wish, the work. So I went back and I say, hey, who did that great work, and then all of a sudden, checklist, oh, I did that, and they feel seen, right? But also it's a reminder that, it isn't, that checklist is important, it's part of how we communicate, so I don't have to say, who did this, and emails back and forth, but I can go in and we have that information there, and then we can spend our time communicating about other things.
So then what about, so Basecamp, great. I'm sure Jason will have answers to this too, but or John. Because our checklists that I have literally are pieces of, they're documents. So in terms of apps or Basecamp, what sort of checklist, that's awesome, Basecamp. What else is there?
Oh, okay. So let me lay this out in a larger format, because it's part of the questions I've written. So, guys,
I'm ahead of you today, Jason.
You guys are all so far ahead of me. This is so good.
Fix my problems.
Yeah, no, I'm on it. Okay, so the question is, what kind of tools are available to help manage and delegate checklists? And so we got Basecamp, which is great. This is 37 Signals, guys. Man, read their books. They are so good. And they, where the 37 Signals guy, I'm going to rant about this for a second. But they totally dog food their own products. They build stuff that they can use to help build their own stuff. And then they go, hey, this worked out really well. Let's just give it to everybody. And so they are, I love them. What about, okay, everybody else.
What did you call it though? What's 37 what?
37 Signals. Yeah.
Founders of Basecamp.
Yeah. And they're just, I love their stuff. Read their books. Man, they're so good.
Is Basecamp free or expensive?
Steph, what do you think? Do you think Basecamp is expensive?
For what it does for my business, absolutely not.
Yeah.
And I've researched, for a solid 6 years now, I've been using online tools and refining. And I used Basecamp early on when my business was much smaller, and then I stopped using it for a while. Where my business is at right now, it's a key component. This is how I communicate with our photo teams or photographers who are everywhere, and they know exactly the expectations. We share image samples. And then the post-production team sees all of that photo briefing, so the post-production team knows right away what's expected from the client. So when they get the images, they know what to do with the images. So from A to Z, we use Basecamp. We use one project per event. I think I manage it really tightly. So as soon as the project is done, it's archived, because you build, there's levels of how many projects you have for your monthly fee. Because I use it so much, I don't think it's.
Just for you viewers at home, just so you don't think that, just so you know what Steph is talking about with as far as people all over the place. She has locations in Toronto, in Vancouver, in Calgary, and Edmonton, and she's using Basecamp to manage all of them, I would assume. Yes. So that's the man. So
we were using Basecamp when we were only in Calgary as well, just because it surpasses emails and sending back and forth documents. It just became so much more productive by using this.
There's dozens and dozens of really good project managing tools. Basecamp is generally accepted as one of the premier ones. An alternative to Basecamp I can recommend is something called Asana, A-S-A-N-A, which is, some people prefer one, some people prefer the other, but they're both awesome at helping you manage teams with projects.
I get nervous, like Asana, yeah, but you can't export from Asana. I looked into that one, and I'm like, but then if it goes away, then I have no company history. Like, you couldn't export anything that, so then I could never look back, oh, what did I do last year if it went away? Like, there's no way to, that's what I sort of was nervous about it.
I would be nervous about that too. I don't know the answer off the top of my head. I'm surprised to learn that that might be the case.
I would email them and ask them and say, because I'll bet you that if you signed up for an account, because I use the free version, but if you signed up for the paid account with those guys, I'm sure they would just email you your data. So they're like,
yeah, I wouldn't get involved in any bit of software that didn't allow me to take the data with me.
Exactly. That's
if I wanted to change. So for sure, that's an important consideration.
It could be just the free version that I was, because I'm cheap.
I have a second tool that I use with Basecamp, and between those two, I mean, there's other things like we use a Google Calendar for the team and to actually schedule resources and things like that. But as far as running the business and the events, I use the software called Things from Mac. And honestly, I run my life and my business, every single thing. I mean, even my grocery list is on it. But it's all sectioned by areas, so I can focus on just the one thing that I need to focus on right now. And that's made a leaps and bounds into my creativity overnight when I start using that. So, and it's synced with the cloud. Sorry, it's called Things from Mac.
There's a version of a similar product that works really great with Google Gmail and Google Apps called Todoist, which is a great to-do list management productivity tool.
Shayla, what about you? What tool do you use to manage your checklists?
I use Evernote.
Really? How do you find it?
Go to the App Store. That's what I do.
Oh no, I meant like, what's your experience with using it?
Oh, okay. Well, we have, for the ISES Hangouts, we have our own notebook for that, and then we have it separated by checklists, and then we also have email templates that we use. And I found out like there's a certain button where you can make actual check marks into it. So
yeah,
little checklist. So it's
introduced.
It's
boxes.
It's super cute. So
so there's an additional endorsement. One, it's free, it's good, and it's cute.
Cute.
That's what I love about it. So and I'm more of a visual person, so like adding the check to it, it's like, okay, it's done. Like.
And did you find that it's easy to get the hang of? Like was it like Photoshop, or was it like using Microsoft Word, where it's just like, oh, just start.
It's definitely like using Microsoft Word.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. The one thing so we, as you know, obviously, I know we use Evernote. One of the things that I find useful about it is it's really easy to copy notes into new folders. So I build templates for stuff, like for my daily checklist, and I use Evernote and I copy my templates. So here's the stuff that I do every day, and I will make a copy of that. And there's like functions that you can use inside. Like if you use a Mac, you can use AppleScript, and you click a button, and it'll automatically generate a template in a new notebook for you inside of Evernote. And so this, like, really, I love Evernote. That's one of my favorites. So I use Evernote to manage my checklists, but for project management stuff, I use Asana. And then I also use a product called OmniFocus to manage my own personal shenanigans. So there's
a checklist for your checklists?
I have a checklist for my checklist, yes. And then I've got a checklist for my checklist for my other checklist.
OmniFocus is awesome. It's a Apple-specific product.
And so I'm a big fan of the getting things done methodology, and so what I usually use, I could probably condense all the stuff I do in OmniFocus into Evernote, because I know they've started putting some functionality into it, but for me, building projects, I like to do it in OmniFocus.
So OmniFocus you use specifically for
Mac.
Yeah, so specifically I use it for determining when projects are finished or figuring out what has to happen next with a project. And then I use Evernote for a pile of all of my documentation and email templates, and all of my checklists go into there. And so that's what I use. But I use Asana for delegation. So I got a 3-tiered shenanigan going on. Nil, I feel like did we get a piece of hardware out of you or a piece of software out of you?
No, not yet.
Okay.
Some technical issues there. Sorry.
Yeah, welcome back.
Thank you. Well, I've just started reusing Evernote. I dropped off of Evernote for a little while. So I'm trying to check out some YouTube videos about what's the best way to implement it in my world. And then I don't know, this really makes, it's not really a productivity app, but it's made our lives so much easier for the rental people out there in special events. We use Inflatable Office, so it's cloud-based rental software, but within there you have process workflow and things like that. So.
Well, I know you're a big fan of this kind of stuff. So there's like. Yeah.
And then what else do we use? We've really implemented a lot through Dropbox. So our checklists are pretty much housed there, but I think I'm going to follow up with your idea of Evernote and doing that.
Nice, another convert.
Yeah, and then we also have a policy procedures manual which lists pretty much everything that we do.
Right. So that is like the master grand checklist of all checklists.
Right.
Cool. Kareen, what do you think? Was that? Do you think we covered not only a little bit about buy-in, but also a little bit about the tools we use?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you got another question? What else can we do? What else can we do for you?
How else can you help my business? Well, you can.
I feel like that's a different hangout. This one's about checklists.
No, like, is there? I guess there must be like, consultants that can come in and look at your business and tell you which ones are the best fit for you. Is there people that just do that?
You want to tackle this one? So for those of you who have recently joined us since the beginning, John is with W5 Coaching, and he is a very esteemed business coach, and he has worked with actually a number of people in ISES Vancouver. So John, take it away.
Kareem, what exactly is your question again, please?
Oh no, just if there's companies or people, there must be out there that can actually sort of do an evaluation of your company and say, oh, Asana is better for you than Basecamp, instead of me trying to sit through all these and learn all these programs to find the best fit. If I can just tell somebody, this is what I need it to do, pick one.
Well, there probably is.
I need like an app broker.
There probably is someone who's got that on their business card. I just don't know who it is. But if you're looking for resources, let me refer you to a thing called the Checklist Manifesto.
Oh, nice, John.
Which is written by a guy named Atul Gawande, who's a surgeon in Boston, and it's an awesome book, really easy to read, with packed with great information about what makes checklists helpful and useful. His experience was he went to and instituted a checklist for surgeons for operating rooms in hospitals throughout the world. 9 different hospitals, ranging from hospitals in Boston, one of the premier, most esteemed hospitals in the world, right through to hospitals in the bushland of, desert Africa, really primitive hospitals. And in every case, the use of a checklist improved results, meaning there were fewer mistakes, less often did the wrong limb, so to speak, get cut off, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And he, in fact, spoke quite a bit about what it was like to get checklists implemented, how difficult it was to in the cultures of all these different circumstances, to get people to accept and subordinate their own sort of will to using a checklist. And so if you're looking for a little bit of a resource or a way that you can get some advice or insight on what makes them work, read this book, The Checklist Manifesto, Atul Gawande. It is awesome. Really fun read.
Cool. So I think in regards to more resources about checklists, this seemed to be the only book that was related to this realm, which I find really interesting, and I'm so glad that John got to talk about it because he's read it and I haven't. I just did some research, which means I Googled it, but still research. So I'm gonna try and tackle Corinne's question. So in regards to figuring out which is the best apps for you, honestly, I think you just pick one and start using it, and then you learn how to use it best, and then you figure out, that it's really a gradual process. Like I said, for me, I'm using 3 different things for the thing that we're discussing. There was others who only use 2 different things. Stephanie likes things. OmniFocus is almost identical to things. The 2 are like really, really on par. But I would never use things in a million years because I love OmniFocus. Right?
Jason, just to underline what you're describing, if on a Saturday morning or sometime when you got a little bit of casual time, if you start with Asana or any other app and an hour later you haven't got the hang of it, it's the wrong app for you.
Heck yeah.
It's really as simple as that. Just start playing with them, and you'll find which one works best for what you're thinking and the way that you think about things and the way that you want to use stuff. It should be as intuitive. An app, an iPad, was presented to an orangutan in the zoo in Miami, and that orangutan started using an iPad within 30 minutes. And if you're going to start using an app and you can't get it as easily as that,
you are dumber than an orangutan.
Jason, I was trying to skirt that conclusion to a different place. But
I got all excited. I was like,
it should be as easy to pick up.
Let's be positive here.
As I was starting to talk about that, I recognized the risk of, this could land up in a bad place. I need to shift how this thinks.
My job as the host.
These are very good points.
It should be as easy and as intuitive to get as it might be an iPad.
So the good news is that a lot of these things have free versions, and so just go in and build one project, right? Just go, don't go dump your whole life into these things.
Exactly.
Just go use it for one thing, and then if it's like, this is stupid and I hate it. And the funny thing is that whatever you start with, it's really going to go one of 2 ways. It's going to teach you about how these kinds of applications work, and you're going to get frustrated and quit on that one, pick up the next one, but you're going to have all this base knowledge from the first one. So the second one will be easier to use. Or you'll build up with this base knowledge, and then you'll be like, all right, fine, I'm sticking with this. So
I have an idea for you, Corinne. So you pick 2, let's say Asana versus Basecamp. You don't want to spend 2 hours figuring it out. So you approach your team, and you're like, hey, need somebody to who wants to explore Basecamp, who wants to explore Asana, and then in an hour, you each have 10 minutes to tell me why it's awesome or not.
That's my idea.
That's an awesome idea. Delegate.
And then if they still can't decide, they go to Thunderdome.
Yeah.
The other aspect
they're the ones
that
that have to use it the most, right? So it's
absolutely
important.
Well,
exactly.
yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like, who's going to use it? Get them engaged in deciding which one it's going to be. Remember too that they're only tools, right? And it's easy to go. I mean, as I said, I've been using these things for quite a few years now, and it'd be easy for me to go, ooh, new, shiny, now I want to try Asana. But if you want to keep your team engaged and bought into what you're using, you can't change tool too often.
Yeah.
So be careful about that too. But if you engage them from the beginning, then they'll want to use it if they've chosen it.
Awesome. Yeah.
I also feel that every time you switch a tool, you're going to have a little bit of ramp-up time. So you may lose that momentum you've got going as you're building a business.
Yeah. Right.
All right. So I'm gonna man, this is so good. This is like my favorite episode ever.
It's awesome.
So let's talk about consequences of not using checklists. Let's talk about this dark place where you get into people not using checklists. What happens what's at risk here? What can go sideways?
I won't give away the plot here, but there's a reason Atul Gawande got interested in checklists. And you don't find out that reason until the very end of the book, where I'll just say this much. Well, he had a very catastrophic result in an operating circumstance, and that personal story is what drove him forward and got him to commit to and become a promoter of and advocate of checklists. Hey, would you? But let me ask you a different way. Would you get on an airplane and fly to Paradise, Hawaii, or something, if you knew the pilot didn't do the checklist? Would you
just
do
winging
that?
it?
He's
Yeah, I
just
don't know if
winging
I
it,
can.
exactly. You know, we'd all be crazy to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the places for the airline industry is the result of not doing this is possibly everyone dies.
There's a consequence.
Yeah. So for surgeons, possibly everyone dies. Elevator repair people, possibly everyone dies. So the event industry, maybe not as quite dramatic, but what can happen if we don't hit these details? We don't hit these. We don't use these as methodologies.
Well, just to be a little dramatic about it, your company dies because
sure. Yes.
Unhappy customers, unhappy reputation.
Yeah.
Circumstances where you weren't able to deliver up to your own or your customers' expectations.
Yeah.
So it may not be quite as literal, but it's just as important.
Sure. Shayla?
I think it would be your reputation on the line.
Yeah. You're those guys who forget those things, right? What happens? You guys didn't bring enough linens. How come? Well, we just wing it.
Yeah. That's why
Let
we pack extra.
let me put it the opposite way, which is this: how does that company with the arches get those guys to make the French fries to taste the same whether they're in Moscow, Vancouver, or Hong Kong? They're made by 16-year-olds, and the parents of that 16-year-old can't get him or her to clean his bedroom.
Right.
How do they do that? How do they get that so consistently? It's because they're great at routine, at systems, and a great system is a checklist.
Right.
It's the most important, most basic system of all.
So some of the risks are okay. So in the event industry, actually, on the engineering side, like on the large infrastructure side, people can get hurt. So there is, like stages aren't assembled correctly. So that's one potential consequence. So it can be a little dramatic. We've covered you fail to meet your client's expectations, and that is a huge one. Where so where else? What if we just wing it? What else? What, like, if we're not using the checklist, what else are we doing? What else? How else does it hurt us?
You may not get paid.
You may not get paid. Yes.
Right. Like
what about
catastrophic?
So Stephanie was talking about. Steph, I feel like I know that this is in your brain because you kind of hinted at it earlier. What else? What happens if your guys don't use a checklist for what they're doing? What happens if they just make it up as they go along?
Well, there will be delays for one.
Right.
There will be missing deadlines.
Yeah. It'll be
right, left and center. I think the worst thing for us would be, because it's fairly rare that we're handling one project at a time, right? There may be 10 events in the pipeline at one time, and they're all at different stages. And so it takes a lot of brain power to remember. It would take a lot of brain power to remember where everything is at. So
right.
Yeah, we'll be missing deadlines. We'll be wasting time communicating about all these little things.
Bad communication. It's inefficient, right? Like there's, it's there. If you're just making up as you go, then it's like, then you actually have to take time and go like, what happens next?
Well, I see that sometimes. Actually, if I can be candid, I see that sometimes on site, where it's a bit like a lack of communication, but where there's just a few people who know what's going on. Mm-hmm. Right? And these people are like overwhelmed because everybody needs that one piece of information from them. Whereas if a checklist had been shared, I know it's being simplified, but
no, I think you are bang on.
It puts undue stress onto those people.
Yeah. It'll make your life suck as you're trying to get your event done if you haven't handed a bunch of checklists out to people. If you were the only repository for information, speaking as a production manager, is that awful.
Mm-hmm. I think that I can see, that the event could just be shut down, and the fire marshal comes and you forgot to measure whichever, the clearance of the new entrance that you custom built, and then, the event's not happening.
Yeah. Yeah, heck yeah. Your event gets shut down. So there are a bunch of good reasons to use checklists. So can we overdo it? Is there like a point at which you've given too much detail on a checklist where it becomes burdensome? I want to ask Shayla. Shayla, do you find that there is like where you're looking at the checklist and you're like, there's just too many pieces of detail, and I feel like I'm totally opening myself up here, but let's do it.
Yeah, there's a lot of details on the checklist, but we made it foolproof almost.
Right.
So then if anything ever happens to me and I need to pass it on, it'll make it just super easy for the next person to take on the responsibilities.
Right. So
but
what if you see it and it is pedantic? Like, what if you look at it and you're like, that totally doesn't need to be there? What do you do?
I delete it if it's not supposed to be there.
Right. That tickles me pink. Oh, okay.
But this is a point when I make it just a simple guideline for myself. Like I just kind of overlook it for myself because I'm like, okay, like I already know how to do that, so I just skip that step.
Right. What about the rest of you guys? How do we overdo it? Or can we overdo it?
One of the ways to make checklists more effective is to break them up into smaller
man, it's checklists all the way down.
Well, what I heard you say, Jason, is how many checklists are there necessary to put on one of these Hangouts?
Yeah.
6.
Yeah,
the pilots don't do a single checklist when they get the aircraft off the ground. In fact, they go through multiple checklists. A checklist shouldn't have more than, I think Atul in his book said, any more than about 15 things to do on a checklist is about the max that you should have on a checklist. So they're short, crisp, focused, and then you move on to the next checklist for the next activity. So if you're looking at a 100-point checklist, the chances of that thing being done are very, very remote. So one way to ease or make checklists work better is to make them less complicated.
All right. Well, I think we'll put that in the cap of ways to get people to have buy-in is keep your checklist simple.
Short.
And short. Before we go, so can we overdo it? Did we just say did we just agree that we can't? I feel like we could. I feel like checklists can.
Yeah, it's in that way that I think if you're trying to, get someone to pay attention to 100 items on a single checklist, that's overdoing anyone's ability to, bandwidth to try and apply that thing. So we can overdo it that way.
Right.
Yeah, because you can be at the point where you're managing the checklist instead of using the checklist to manage the project or the people.
Right.
So
right. Where you spend all this, where you get all nervous about doing your project, and you spend all this time organizing it, so you never actually do your project.
Yeah.
I've definitely seen that before. I'm sure we all have.
Sure. Yeah.
It's important to have a sense of accomplishment as well. If you don't actually accomplish your checklist ever, that's kind of what happens to me sometimes. I go down this list and I make such a long checklist, and I don't feel like I'm getting anywhere. So I break it out into subcategories, and then by role is also very important. So at an event to hand off to everybody.
Yeah.
This is your checklist. You have these 10 items to take care of.
I think you hit a really important point there. Like, doing a short checklist is a small victory that makes you feel great about the work you've done. Like, everybody needs as many of those as they can get in their day, right? So that's a really, and I think that might actually also fall into the buy-in thing, where people do a 15-thing checklist, and then they go like, hey, I did a thing, and our brains give us a little endorphin. And then,
I found with something like I used to, just even for my daily checklist, everything that I would do in a day, I used to put it all in one day, and then I'd pretty much move it all to the next day, and then to the next day, and maybe one or two things was taken off. So I found I would never feel like that same feeling. I would never feel like I actually accomplished anything or I got anything done. But then what I really did is look at the checklist and break out the checklist by time more. So it's like, what will I really accomplish in this week? This will be my week checklist. And then I'll just put that stuff, even though it needs to be there, I'll put it to the next week's. And so I hit the new checklist so that I can actually reasonably accomplish that within the week. And then I'm like, now I feel like I accomplish things every day versus moving all of those items day by day, just pushing them ahead and feeling like I wasn't accomplishing 40 things. And now I'm accomplishing 5 things and I'm actually doing it.
So I think we've totally delightfully migrated to the next thing I want to talk about, which is what are the habits that you want to encourage people to do when building checklists? And so we've got keep them short and simple, right? We've got spelling out every step is maybe too far. We've got what else do we have, guys? What other good habits do you encourage with checklists?
Well, I think just to build on what I was just saying at the time, it's to put the right time things together. Like if you put the checklist and it's got a mix of now and later, it's going to be hard to manage that checklist. unless there's sort of some sense to the time or the urgency to the items on the checklist, I think that can help if your checklist is organized as well, not just a list of.
So that it's not just a bunch of things to do; it's also communicating, and that helps.
Yeah, we're moving into a specific type of checklist known as a to-do list, a daily to-do list. And so one of the things about a to-do list that I would say is if you have 150 priorities, how many priorities do you have?
Right.
None.
You don't have any.
Yeah.
You can't have 150 priorities. So I completely agree with what Karina's saying is it's okay to take 145 things off your list and set them aside and say these are the things I won't focus on. Because focus is as important. To be productive, deciding what you're not going to focus on is more important than what you're going to focus on. Being able to say no, that doesn't matter, will make you more effective, more productive.
That is such great advice. Can you think of a is there? Do you want to talk about how they do it and getting things done with dealing with that?
I think I don't know getting things done as intimately as I think you might.
Okay. Well, you've been. Oh, man, you're such a great source of wisdom. Okay. So basically, in GTD, the way they do it is they have a thing called the Maybe Someday folder, and when there are things that you need to clear out, your stuff that you're working on, you just dump everything in the Maybe Someday folder, and then you review it every week if you're really tenacious.
It helps with your conscience and your integrity when you know that, hey, these 5 things I will get done, and these other things, I've parked them in a way that I'm responsible about, and I'm not ignoring them. I've just set them aside because today isn't the right day to do them.
Man, that's great. All right.
I have 4 tips that I can give.
Sweet. Yeah, no, perfect. Go.
We've shifted from, in my mind, the way I understand the conversation, we've shifted a little bit away from the workflow and more into productivity, on an ongoing day-to-day basis. And so that's where I personally use things, but there's a lot of different, ways to do it. The first thing that I did when I started to use that software was to empty my brain of everything that was in it, everything that was, I want to do this someday or I have to do this tomorrow, all of it. I've learned that, and I've read that if you don't do that, and I've experienced this, if you don't do that regularly and you've got naggings to do in your head and you haven't captured it, it takes energy. It takes mental energy, and you keep having the same, oh yeah, I got to do this, oh yeah, I got to do this. That's a waste of energy. Write it down, capture it somewhere, even if it's in a little notebook.
To underline, that's particularly true for creative people, what you're just saying, Stephanie, because as soon as you are not using your bandwidth to try and remember all the stuff that vaguely is causing you anxiety because you're wondering, heck, have I got it all? As soon as you document it somewhere, all of that bandwidth then becomes available to you to use in the thing you love to do, which is your own creativity. So I'm just underlining and emphasizing what you just said, and I'll let you. I'm anxious to hear what the other 3 things are that you have.
I've actually integrated my emails into things so that everything is activated, from one email. I know if there's a to-do attached to it. So anyway, so that's all part about capturing. Karen was saying, how you move from all your things, like 40 things to do today, and you're moving on to tomorrow. I'm still struggling with that, but I know that the thing to learn is to have realistic expectations. So I don't. I think I can do a million things still in a day, so I'm still dealing with that. But I know that
I can do 2 things in a day.
Yeah, I struggle with that constantly. There's actually there's a quote that I like, which may or may or not be real, but Benjamin Franklin, when asked like how he could get so much done in a day, and he said, because when I start, I plan to do one thing, and so
right. And it's that feeling of accomplishment. So being realistic with what you can accomplish in a day or in the next hour and that kind of thing.
Right. So when you're building, keep going.
To me, after that is separating everything in areas of focus. So I do that in different ways. I separate in my volunteer, aka ISES stuff, my business and my personal life, and I separate them that way, and also by tasks. So is it an email to be replied? Is it phone calls, or is it some highly engaging, demanding creative work, or I'm going to be doing creative writing? So the reason that I separate in areas of focus is that I know that first thing in the morning, I've got 2 or 3 hours where I can tackle something really big, and I will make huge progress. If I answer emails all morning, I'm going to get nothing else done, and nothing will get clicked off my left. So I block time, being aware that some tasks are more demanding than others, and then that's the way that am being the most productive that I can be.
Awesome. And was that 4 or was that 3?
That was 4.
That was 4. So, nice. That was
areas
that
of
was a
focus
whole
and blocking time according to your levels of energy.
That was fantastic, because so there is extra content above and beyond there. So we're talking about productivity. We're talking about making sure that you get your checklist done. We're talking about having reasonable expectations for yourself. We're talking about compartmentalizing time. We're talking about creating context for when and which you should do things, and the evil that is email, which if you try and do it as it comes in all of the time, that your day will disappear and suddenly it's 2 o'clock and oh my God, I have to get something to eat, and then now it's 4:30 and I'm gonna spend the evening working. So, does anybody else want to? Does anybody anything want to pitch in on this good habits? Because Steph, that was a great list.
I think one of the things that came to mind for me when I was listening to Stephanie describe circumstances is that we typically are trying to balance 2 sets of activities. We've got a bunch of projects, and we have a bunch of to-dos, and they're on a different scale.
For sure.
And so a project can have 100 to-dos in it, and if you're trying to manage a project in the realm of, man, I've got to do 100 to-dos here, that's where a lot of time when the anxiety comes out. And so it's easier to say, what are the next 3 things that I can do in this project?
Yeah, so don't demoralize yourself with your checklist.
Exactly.
I think is the key, is to remember to pretend like you were delegating, manage yourself, pretend like you're delegating to somebody else and going, like, here's a reasonable thing for you to do today, versus like, hey, entrepreneur, you need to grind yourself down to a nub. Here's the 1,000 things that have to get done.
There's another aspect to it, which is we think of to-dos as something we do every day. There has to be one occasion, at least once per week, it takes about 20 minutes typically, where we manage the big list, what do I want to get done this year, versus the stuff I got to get done today, and 20 minutes once a week where we balance that list. What are the things I got to do on the I got to get stuff done this year list with the stuff I need to get done this week list? Right. If you do that once a week, you will accomplish both. If you don't do that, you typically get caught up playing. You become the ball in a pinball machine, just bouncing around, getting pushed into doing the next thing by whatever whatever ding that happened in the pinball machine.
And I think I'm gonna. So I think we're just starting to gently drift into this realm of how we create strata in our lives, where we look at like the ground level, the 10,000 foot, the 30,000 foot, 50,000 foot. So I'm gonna rein it in because I want to let everybody go get on with their day, but there's just so much great stuff to talk about.
So we can do our checklist.
Because you guys got to go do your checklists, and Shayla has to do her checklist, and I got to do my checklist, and there's checklists all around. So really today we have talked about delegation, documentation. We've talked about specifically to the event industry, how we have detail work, we have deadline work, and that checklists help us make all of these things actually happen so that we can manage our staff well, so we can have reasonable expectations for ourselves, so that we can deliver good things to our clients. Man, is there anything that checklists can't do? These things are so great. So we've talked a little bit
about a foot rub.
They can't give foot rubs, but they could tell somebody how to give a good foot rub. So that's almost as good. So we've got some additional resources that you can check, which is the book. What was it called again, John?
The Checklist Manifesto.
Checklist Manifesto.
A tool go one day.
A tool go one day, and I'm sure it's available on eBay. And there's I found some really great reviews of it. If you want to learn a little bit more about it, there are business coaches out there in the world who can help you with these things in these larger scope. People like John Neuenberg with W5 Coaching. So thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your collective wisdom about all of this. It was great to have you again, and also get your name pronounced correctly. And your website is w5coaching.com. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Excellent. So we have Nil Sochek as well to thank from Denver, and she is with Splendor for Your Guests. She is the VP of Membership with ISES Denver. Thank you so much. Nil, what was your which is your website?
SplendorForYourGuests.com.
SplendorForYourGuests.com, right? Okay, and they've actually got really neat stuff. They have this really excellent, very sort of niche decor elements that they produce and present at events. So they're I would just go check out their website, even if you're not in that market, because I actually love what they do. So we also have Stephanie LeBlond to thank for man, Steph, you were on fire today. You're all on fire, but Steph, man, there was you. It was so good to have you. So Stephanie she's with ISES Calgary, and she's the VP of Marketing, but she is all across Canada. She's got her photography business, which spans from Toronto, Calgary, Edmonton, and she's also in Vancouver. In fact, she sponsors ISES Vancouver events. That's how. Man, she's everywhere all the time, and she's some really great advice about software, and I'm really glad the conversation got to go there. So, did I miss any? Oh, of course I missed some people. Corrine. I wouldn't forget Corrine. So, Corrine, thank you again for joining us, as you've always been incredibly supportive of the show and sharing your questions, which today really helped fuel this conversation and make my job so much easier. I don't even know why I write. I'm just going to bring you. I'm not going to write questions anymore. I'm just going to show up and talk. And of course, there is a big thank you to our audience for watching and the other people who help make this show possible, and that is, of course, including Shayla, who is a great panelist today. I'm so proud of you. And so there is man, and you are such an expert in this realm, because this is something that you've been working with, and I'm so happy that we got you in on the discussion today, because usually you're a little shy and a little quiet. So thank you so much for all the work you do. Thank you for filling in those checklists and improving them and making the show happen. And of course, I also want to thank Emily McDonald, who's out there in cyberspace, and she is tweeting away and working on Facebook and helping people see what we're doing in this great show. And man, so I hope that was fun and entertaining for everybody. I don't even know what to. Man, there's so much stuff I want to talk about. So details in our event are absolutely crucial. That is your big takeaway. Checklists help you do this. And so. But it is only one of many tools that you can access, and there's all these great tools we talked about today. I would encourage you to check them out. I told you which ones I like the most. So most of our Twitter accounts are either around us here or on our websites, or we're actually probably tweeting about it right now, I'll bet. So if you're a little bashful, you can always connect with us later on through Twitter at ISES Vancouver. You can use the hashtag ISES Hangouts. You can email us, hangouts@isesvancouver.com, if you want to come on our show at some point. And ISES is the International Special Events Society. Many of us are members and board members, and of course we always welcome guests like John. And we so if you want to get involved in the event industry or learn more, we're actually a great bunch of people to get involved with. And so push that subscribe button. Man, I always, because it's backwards, I'm never sure. It's one of those directions. Click it now. Click the subscribe button and subscribe to our channel. Check out our previous episodes. There's a whole bunch of really great content in here with some really great panels. And so everyone, I want to encourage you to enjoy the rest of your day and all the checklists you're going to be filling in. And I really hope to see you soon. So take care and say goodbye, everybody.
Bye.